The twin sons of Xylos beat down on the slave market of Karjan like a pair of merciless, golden hammers, baking the sandstone plaza into an oven that shimmered with heat. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, fierce sweat, and the cloying spice of Zarroot incense the merchants burned to mask it all. On a raised platform of black basalt, a Vexian slaver, his leathery skin crisscrossed with old scars, was barking his wares to a crowd of bored-looking nobles and hard-faced mercenaries. His current offering, a young human male named Finn, stood chained at his feet, his head bowed, his ribs visible beneath a layer of grime and bruises. He was a novelty here, a pale-skinned curiosity from a backwater world, his only crime being in the wrong place when the raiders came. His world had been a simple one of farming and quiet skies, now replaced by the cacophony of this alien bazaar and the gnawing terror in his gut. He kept his eyes fixed on the dusty ground, counting the cracks in the stone, trying to build a wall of numbness around his heart to keep the despair at bay. Suddenly, the chaotic noise of the market seemed to hush, as if a great hand had pressed down on the very air. A ripple of deference moved through the crowd, parting like a crimson sea before a royal barge. From the shade of a grand, canopied palanquin carried by 4 hulking, silent brutes, she emerged. Queen Lyra of the Viral Dominion was a vision that defied the brutal setting. Her skin was the deep, rich purple of twilight amethyst, flawless and smooth, and her long hair, the color of fresh snow, cascaded over the shoulders of her elegant, silver-threaded robes. Her eyes, large and intelligent, were the color of molten gold, and they swept over the scene with an air of detached authority that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. She moved with a grace that seemed to belong to a different universe entirely, her every step silent on the hot stone. The slaver's voice faltered for a moment, his usual bluster evaporating under her gaze. He bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the platform. Finn, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, dared to lift his head. His breath caught in his throat. He had seen many strange and frightening things since his capture, but nothing like her. She was alien, yes, undeniably so. Yet there was a profound, almost sorrowful beauty in her face that struck him with unexpected force. He quickly looked back down, his heart hammering against his ribs, a fresh wave of fear washing over him. What could such a powerful being possibly want with a broken thing like him? The queen's golden eyes, however, had already found him. They lingered on his thin frame, his matted brown hair, the defiant set of his jaw even in his submission. She did not speak to the slaver, but merely raised a single, slender finger adorned with a ring of polished obsidian. The slaver understood instantly. "This one your radiance?" he croaked, his voice cracking. "A prime specimen of Terran stock. Strong, young, and unbroken." Lyra's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, a gesture that held no warmth, only calculation. "His price?" she stated, her voice a low, melodic hum that seemed to vibrate in Finn's bones. What followed was a transaction so swift and absolute it left Finn dizzy. The slaver named an exorbitant sum, hoping to capitalize on the queen's apparent interest. Without a flicker of hesitation, Lyra's chief attendant, a severe-looking woman with green skin and sharp features, produced a data slate. A few taps, and the slaver's eyes widened with greedy delight as his account balance updated. The heavy iron collar around Finn's neck was unlocked and removed, the chains at his wrists and ankles replaced with lighter, silken bonds that felt strangely cool against his skin. Before he could process what was happening, he was being led away from the platform, away from the jeering crowd, and towards the queen's palanquin. He stumbled, his legs weak from days of confinement, but a firm, gentle hand from one of the queen's guards steadied him. He risked a glance back at the market, at the life of brutal anonymity he was leaving behind, and felt a confusing mix of terror and a desperate, fragile hope. The journey to the royal palace was a blur of shifting sands and towering dunes under the watchful gaze of the twin sons. The palanquin was surprisingly comfortable inside, lined with soft furs and smelling of some exotic, calming floral scent that was a stark contrast to the market stench. Finn sat hunched in a corner, his mind racing. Why had she bought him? He'd heard whispers among the other slaves about the virile queen, how she was a brilliant but ruthless strategist, how she had unified the warring desert clans through a combination of diplomacy and terrifying displays of power. He'd also heard darker rumors, stories of her using her slaves for purposes best left unspoken. His imagination conjured images of torture chambers and strange, alien rituals, and a cold sweat broke out on his brow despite the palanquin's cool interior. When they finally arrived, the palace was not the fortress of black stone he'd expected, but a sprawling complex of pearlescent white towers that seemed to grow organically from the largest dune on the horizon. It was a masterpiece of architecture, all flowing curves and open terraces that caught the wind and offered breathtaking views of the endless desert. Inside, the air was cool and scented with the same delicate flowers. Servants, all of them humanoid but of various alien species, moved with quiet efficiency. Finn was taken to a private chamber that was more luxurious than anything he'd ever seen in his life. There was a soft bed, a basin of clean water, and clothes laid out for him, simple, loose-fitting trousers and a tunic of fine, breathable fabric. A medic, a kind-faced alien with blue skin, tended to his bruises and gave him a nutrient-rich broth that tasted like heaven. For the first time in weeks, he felt safe. It was a dangerous feeling, and he knew it. His first official summons came 2 days later. He was led through winding corridors of polished white stone to a vast, open-air audience chamber on the highest terrace. Queen Lyra was there, seated on a throne of woven moonwood, looking out over her kingdom. She was alone. "Finn," she said, without turning, her voice the same low hum he remembered. "Your name is Finn, is it not?" He swallowed, his throat dry. "Yes, Your Majesty." She finally turned to look at him, her golden eyes studying him with an intensity that made him feel transparent. "You are not what I expected," she mused. "I thought you would be more feral, more broken." "I'm just a farmer, ma'am," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "From a planet called Earth." "A farmer?" she repeated, a ghost of something. Amusement in her eyes. "And now you are mine." She rose from her throne and walked towards him, her movements fluid and silent. He stood frozen, unsure whether to bow or run. She stopped just an arm's length away, close enough for him to see the faint, intricate patterns tattooed on her temples, close enough to smell the subtle fragrance of her hair. "I have a task for you, Finn of Earth. A simple one for now. My personal archives are a mess. Scrolls, data crystals, ancient tablets, all in disarray. You will organize them. You will learn our language, our history. You will be my archivist." It was not the fate he'd feared, but it was still a cage, gilded though it may be. He nodded mutely, and so began his strange new life. Days turned into weeks. He worked in a quiet, sun-drenched library filled with the knowledge of 1,000 worlds. He learned the virile tongue, its complex grammar and poetic cadence, from a patient tutor who was a small, green-skinned scholar. He found he had a knack for it. His mind, starved for intellectual stimulation, latching onto the new language with a hunger that surprised even himself. He would often see the queen in the corridors, always regal, always distant. Sometimes she would ask him a question about his work, her queries sharp and insightful, testing his understanding. He answered honestly, his simple, direct way of thinking seeming to intrigue her. One evening, as he was leaving the library, he found her waiting for him on a moonlit balcony overlooking a garden of luminous, night-blooming flowers. She was not in her royal robes, but in a simpler, flowing gown. "Walk with me, Finn," she commanded, though her tone was softer than usual. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the soft crunch of their footsteps on the gravel path and the distant sigh of the desert wind. Finally, she spoke. "Your world, your Earth. Tell me of it." He told her of green fields and blue skies, of oceans and forests, of a life that now seemed like a dream from another lifetime. He spoke of his family, his home, the simple joys he'd taken for granted. As he spoke, he saw a flicker of something in her golden eyes, a longing, a sadness that mirrored his own. In that moment, the gulf between them, between conqueror and conquered, alien queen and human slave, seemed to narrow just a little. His role began to subtly shift. He was no longer just an archivist. He was asked to accompany her on her daily walks, to read passages from ancient texts for her amusement, to offer his opinion on matters of state that she framed as hypotheticals. He discovered she had a dry, sharp wit, and a surprising love for terrible, melodramatic holodramas from the galactic fringe. He found himself laughing with her, a genuine, unguarded laugh that he hadn't thought possible. He also saw the weight she carried, the constant political machinations, the threats from rival houses, the burden of ruling a harsh and unforgiving world. He began to see her not just as his owner, but as a person, a lonely and powerful woman trapped in her own gilded cage. The true nature of her desires became clear one afternoon during a sudden violent sandstorm. The sky turned the color of blood, and howling winds threatened to tear the palace from its foundations. Finn was in the library when the alarm sounded, warning of a structural breach in the West Wing. Without thinking, he ran towards the danger, driven by a need to protect the knowledge he'd come to cherish. He found a section of the archive collapsing, ancient scrolls and priceless data crystals tumbling into the storm. He began frantically trying to secure them, his hands bleeding from the sharp edges of broken shelving. Suddenly, a strong hand grabbed his arm, pulling him back. It was Queen Lyra, her face pale with fear. Not for the archives, but for him. "Foolish human!" she shouted over the roar of the wind, her usual composure shattered. "You would die for paper and plastic? They're your history, your majesty!" He yelled back, his voice raw. "They're everything." In that moment, her facade completely crumbled. She pulled him into a small, reinforced alcove, shielding his body with her own as debris flew past. Her heart was pounding against his chest, a frantic rhythm that matched his own. When the worst of the storm passed, she didn't let go. She looked up at him, her golden eyes wide and vulnerable, stripped of all royal pretense. "My desires, Finn," she whispered, her voice trembling, "are not for your body, but for your mind, for your spirit, for the simple, honest truth you carry inside you that is so absent from my world. I bought you from slavery because I was tired of being surrounded by liars and sycophants. I wanted someone real." Her confession hung in the dusty air between them, more shocking than any act of physical possession could have been. He stared at her, his mind reeling. All his fears, all his assumptions had been wrong. She hadn't wanted a toy or a plaything. She'd wanted a friend, a confidant, a piece of the simple humanity she saw in him. The realization was a physical blow, leaving him breathless. Their relationship deepened after that. The formalities fell away in private. He was no longer the human slave, but simply Finn. She was Lyra. He helped her draft speeches that spoke to the common people, his farmer sensibility grounding her lofty ideals in practical reality. She, in turn, taught him the intricacies of virile politics and strategy, her mind a brilliant, formidable thing he came to deeply respect. He saw her make tough, compassionate decisions that balanced the needs of her people with the harsh realities of their world. He saw her mercy and her strength, her intelligence and her hidden kindness. One day, a delegation from a rival clan arrived, led by a brutish warlord named Korik, who had long coveted the virile throne. He was a mountain of muscle and arrogance, his skin a mottled gray, his eyes small and cruel. During a tense feast in the grand hall, Korik, emboldened by drink and his own sense of entitlement, made a crude joke about the queen's pet human, suggesting Finn was nothing more than a pampered lapdog. The hall fell silent, every eye darting between the warlord and the queen, waiting for her icy wrath. But before Lyra could respond, Finn stood up. He wasn't a warrior, but he had spent his life standing up for his land, his family, his home. He wouldn't stand for this. "I am not a pet," he said, his voice clear and steady, carrying across the silent hall. "I am Finn of Earth, and I serve the queen of my own free will, because she is the most honorable ruler I have ever known." Korik laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Free will? You are a slave, bought and paid for." Finn met his gaze without flinching. A contract can be more than chains. Loyalty freely given is worth more than 1,000 slaves forced to obey. He then turned to Lyra, his heart in his throat, and bowed deeply. "My service is my choice, your majesty, and I would choose it again." The silence that followed was profound. Then Queen Lyra stood. She walked down from her dais, her expression unreadable, and stopped before Finn. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of profound public trust. She then turned her golden eyes on Korik, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 20 degrees. "You hear this, Warlord Korik?" she said, her voice dangerously soft. "My pet has more honor in his little finger than you have in your entire lineage. You will apologize to him now." Korik, stunned and humiliated, sputtered a grudging apology before storming out, his plans for a political coup clearly ruined by the intervention of a simple human farmer. In that moment, Finn realized his place in her court was no longer that of a servant, but of a trusted advisor, a friend whose loyalty was a shield for her throne. Life settled into a new, comfortable rhythm. He was happier than he'd ever thought possible in this strange, alien world. He missed Earth, ached for it sometimes. But he had built a new home here, in the heart of the desert, in the quiet companionship of a purple-skinned queen with hair like snow. He knew their bond was growing into something deeper, something that defied the boundaries of their stations. He saw the way her eyes lingered on him, the softness in her voice when they were alone, the way her hand would sometimes brush his as they walked through the luminous gardens. He felt it in himself, too, a fierce protectiveness, a deep admiration, and a tenderness that went far beyond gratitude. One evening, as they watched the twin suns sink below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple that matched her skin, she turned to him. The usual regal distance was gone, replaced by a nervous vulnerability he'd never seen before. "Finn," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you see when you look at me?" He didn't hesitate. "I see a brilliant leader, a kind heart hidden behind a necessary mask. A woman who carries the weight of a world on her shoulders, yet still finds joy in bad holodramas." He offered her a small, warm smile. "I see Lyra." A single tear, glistening like a diamond, traced a path down her purple cheek. She reached out and took his hand in hers, her touch cool and reassuring. "And I see a man of courage and integrity," she said softly. "A man who chose to stay, who chose to help, who chose me." She paused, her golden eyes searching his face. "My initial desire was for your mind, Finn. But now my heart has its own desires. Desires I never thought I would feel." He squeezed her hand, his own heart swelling with an emotion he could no longer deny. Their journey was far from over. There would be more political storms to weather, more rivals like Korik to face, and the ever-present question of his future on this world. But in that quiet moment, watching the desert night fall around them, holding the hand of the woman who had bought him from slavery only to set his spirit free, Finn knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The story of the human slave and the alien queen was just beginning to write its most fascinating chapter. A tale not of ownership, but of a partnership forged in the crucible of the desert, a bond that promised to change the destiny of a world. The fragile peace of their newfound understanding was shattered a month later by a courier from the galactic capital, his ship bearing the stark insignia of the High Council. The message he delivered was a formal edict, its words cold and absolute. Queen Lyra was to present herself before the council within 30 cycles to answer charges of harboring a prohibited sentient, namely Finn himself. The human species, it seemed, had been classified as a protected but non-sovereign entity following a recent, disastrous first contact incident on a distant colony world. The law was clear: private ownership of a human was now a capital offense, punishable by the dissolution of her royal charter and the annexation of the virile dominion into a corporate-controlled protectorate. Lyra's face, usually a mask of calm control, went utterly still as she read the edict. The blood seemed to drain from her purple skin, leaving it a sickly lavender. Her golden eyes, when they lifted to meet Finn's, were filled with a terror he had never seen before. Not for herself, but for him. "They will take you from me," she whispered, her voice raw. "They will put you in a sterile research facility, a living museum exhibit for the rest of your days." Finn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. His simple life on Earth felt like a lifetime ago, and the thought of being ripped away from this place, from her, was a physical pain in his chest. "What can we do?" he asked, his mind racing. Before she could answer, a new crisis erupted. A series of coordinated attacks struck the outlying virile settlements. Water caravans ambushed, communication relays destroyed. The signature was unmistakable: the gray-skinned raiders of Korik's clan. He had not forgotten his humiliation. He had been waiting, and now, with the High Council's edict providing the perfect distraction, he saw his chance to strike at the heart of Lyra's power while she was politically vulnerable. He wasn't just after territory anymore. He was coming for the palace itself. The twin threats, the external siege and the internal political execution, created a pressure cooker of desperation. In the war room, Lyra's advisors argued for surrender to the council, believing it was the only way to save the Dominion from total annihilation. To them, Finn was a single life, a small price to pay for the survival of millions. Lyra stood at the head of the table, her back straight, her expression unreadable. She listened to their counsel, her silence more terrifying than any outburst. Finally, she spoke, her voice cutting through the room like a vibroblade. "We will not surrender him, and we will not surrender our home." Her plan was audacious, born of a gambler's instinct and a lover's defiance. She would use Korik's own ambition against him. She sent out a false distress signal, a coded plea for aid that was designed to be intercepted by Korik's spies. The message claimed the palace guard was depleted, that she was preparing to flee to the capital to face the council, leaving the treasury virtually unguarded. It was a trap, and she knew Korik was arrogant enough to walk right into it. The night of the attack was a symphony of chaos. Korik's forces, a horde of gray-skinned warriors on massive, six-legged sand lizards, swarmed over the dunes, their war cries echoing in the moonlight. But they found the palace not weak, but ready. Lyra's elite guard, hidden in the dune-sculpted battlements, unleashed a storm of plasma fire. The battle was fierce and brutal, the white stone of the palace running red with alien blood. In the midst of the fighting, a secondary betrayal was revealed. One of Lyra's most trusted counselors, a green-skinned noble named Forlag, had been feeding information to Korik all along, hoping to install himself as a puppet ruler under the warlord's thumb. As the main gate buckled under the assault, Forlag made his move. He seized Finn, pressing a neural disruptor to his temple. "Your reign is over, Lyra," he shouted, dragging Finn towards a waiting skiff. "The council wants him alive, and Korik wants you dead. I intend to please them both." Lyra, who had been directing the defense from a central balcony, saw the betrayal unfold. Her face contorted with a rage so pure it seemed to warp the air around her. With a cry that was part fury, part anguish, she leapt from the balcony, a silver blur against the night sky. She landed between Forlag and the skiff, her personal energy blade, a gift from her ancestors, flaring to life in her hand. The fight was short and savage. Forlag was a politician, not a warrior. Lyra disarmed him with a single, precise strike and then, with a final, contemptuous slash, ended his treachery forever. She turned to Finn, her chest heaving, her golden eyes wide with fear. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice trembling. He shook his head, his own hands shaking as he touched the spot where the disruptor had been. "I'm fine, thanks to you." Their moment of relief was cut short by a deafening explosion from the main gate. Korik himself had breached the inner courtyard, astride his largest beast, his axe dripping with the blood of her guards. He roared her name, a challenge that shook the very foundations of the palace. This was the final confrontation. Lyra handed Finn her sidearm, a sleek pulse pistol. "Get to the command spire," she ordered, her voice regaining its steel. "Activate the planetary defense grid. The code is my birth date in Viral Standard. Do you understand?" He understood. It was the last resort, a network of orbital satellites that could scorch the entire valley clean. It would end the battle, but at a terrible cost. "What about you?" he asked, his voice thick with dread. "I have a warlord to kill," she said simply, her gaze fixed on Korik. Then, for just a second, she softened. She reached up and touched his cheek, her cool fingers a fleeting comfort. "Go, Finn. Trust me." He ran, his heart a drum against his ribs, weaving through the smoke and chaos of the battle-torn corridors. He could hear the clash of steel behind him, the roars of Korik, the defiant shouts of Lyra. He reached the command spire, his fingers flying over the console, inputting the code with a desperate hope. Outside the panoramic window, he saw them, the Queen and the Warlord, locked in a final, deadly dance on the blood-soaked courtyard stones. Korik was a mountain of muscle and rage, but Lyra was a storm of speed and precision, her every movement a testament to her royal training. Just as Korik raised his axe for a final, killing blow, the sky above them lit up with 1,000 points of light. The defense grid was online. A low hum filled the air, a promise of utter annihilation. Korik froze, his eyes wide with terror as he looked up at the sky. In that moment of hesitation, Lyra struck. Her energy blade pierced his heart, and the great warlord fell with a crash that echoed across the silent battlefield. The surviving raiders, seeing their leader dead and the sky alight with death, broke and fled into the desert night. The siege was over. In the aftermath, amidst the pyres for the dead and the work of rebuilding, a new message arrived from the capital. The High Council, having received reports of the attempted coup and Lyra's successful defense of her people against an existential threat, had reconsidered its position. The charge of harboring a prohibited sentient was dropped. In its place was a new offer, a formal alliance. They recognized the strategic value of a strong, loyal viral dominion on the galactic frontier, and they saw in Finn not a slave, but a unique cultural liaison, a bridge between humanity and the wider galaxy. Standing together on the rebuilt balcony, watching a new dawn paint the desert in gold and rose, Lyra and Finn faced their future. The chains of slavery were gone, replaced by a bond forged in fire and trust. He was no longer her property, but her partner, her advisor, her friend, and something more, a feeling that hung unspoken but powerful in the air between them, as vast and enduring as the desert itself. Their story was far from over. It had simply entered a new, more complex, and infinitely more hopeful chapter. The victory over Korak and the Council's unexpected reversal should have been a time of celebration. But for Finn and Lyra, it was a moment of quiet reckoning. The Alliance offer came with its own subtle chains, a permanent liaison post for Finn on the galactic capital world of Ethel, a gilded cage far from the windswept dunes he had come to call home. The Council's message was polite but firm. His presence there was essential for fostering interspecies understanding. It was a sentence of exile disguised as an honor. Lyra read the final terms in her private chamber, the morning light catching the silver threads in her robe. Her face was a mask of regal composure, but Finn saw the truth in the slight tremor of her hand, in the way her golden eyes refused to meet his. She would never ask him to stay. Her sense of duty, her love for her people, would not allow her to chain him to her side if his future lay among the stars. He saw the sacrifice she was preparing to make, and it broke his heart that he spent the next day wandering the palace gardens, the luminous flowers seeming dull and gray to his troubled mind. He thought of his farm on Earth, of the simple life he'd lost. He thought of the archives, of the dry wit they shared over terrible holodramas, of the terrifying, beautiful moment she'd shielded him from the storm. He thought of her hand in his on the balcony, the unspoken promise hanging in the desert air. He realized then that his home wasn't a place on a star chart. It was with her. His destiny wasn't written in the soil of a distant world, but in the heart of this purple-skinned queen who had seen his worth when he felt he had none. That evening, he went to her, not in the audience chamber, but in her private solarium, where she sat alone, staring out at the endless sea of sand. He didn't wait for her to speak. He walked straight to her, took her hands in his, her cool, smooth skin against his rough, calloused palms, and knelt before her. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "The Council can keep their capital. They can keep their titles and their sterile offices. My place is here, not as your slave, not as your archivist, but as your partner, as your equal." Lyra's breath hitched, a single tear tracing its familiar path down her cheek. "Finn, you don't understand. Your people, your future." "My future is my choice," he interrupted gently, "just as my service was. I choose you, Lyra. I choose this world. I choose this life with you. If that means I am a farmer again, tending your gardens or teaching your people about Terran crops, then so be it. But I will not leave you." For a long moment, she simply looked at him, her golden eyes searching his soul. Then, the last of her royal facade melted away, revealing the woman beneath, the woman who was lonely, who was strong, who was finally allowing herself to hope. She pulled him to his feet and into her arms, holding him with a fierceness that spoke of all the fear and love she'd kept locked away. "You stubborn, impossible human," she whispered into his hair, her voice thick with emotion. "You have already changed my world. Now you would stay and build a new one with me." In the weeks that followed, they crafted a new future together. Finn sent a formal, respectful, but utterly final refusal to the High Council, citing his deep integration into virile society and his commitment to the Queen's ongoing cultural restoration projects. To their surprise, the Council accepted his decision without protest. His act of loyalty had only enhanced his value as a symbol of successful integration, a story they could use far more effectively than a caged exhibit. Freed from external threats and internal betrayals, the virile dominion entered a golden age. Finn, using his knowledge of sustainable agriculture from Earth, helped develop new methods to cultivate the harsh desert soil, turning barren stretches of sand into fertile oases that fed the growing population. He became known not as the Queen's human, but as Finn the Builder, a title he wore with quiet pride. And at the center of it all was their love, a quiet, powerful force that grew stronger with each passing season. On the first anniversary of the battle that had nearly torn them apart, under the light of Xylos's twin moons, Lyra took his hand on that same balcony overlooking the desert. The wind carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine, and the stars above were impossibly bright. "The old ways of my people demanded a Queen Mary for political alliance," she said, her voice soft but clear. "But our world is new now, Finn, and my heart has made its own alliance." She turned to him, her golden eyes shining with a love that needed no grand declaration. Will you marry me, Finn of Earth? Will you be my king, not by title, but in truth? His answer was a kiss, a promise sealed not in blood or law, but in the quiet certainty of two souls who had found their home in each other. Their wedding was a simple affair, held in the garden of luminous flowers, attended by the loyal guards, the kind medic, and the green-skinned scholar who had taught him their language. There were no grand speeches, only the vows they wrote themselves, promises of partnership, respect, and unwavering loyalty. Years flowed like the desert sands. Their union brought a stability and compassion to the dominion that became legendary. They adopted 3 orphan children from the war-torn border villages, 2 virile girls and a boy from a nomadic tribe, raising them in a palace filled with laughter, lessons from both earth and virile, and a love that knew no bounds of species or origin. Finn's hair grew streaked with gray, and the lines on Lyra's face deepened, but their hands never stopped seeking each other's. Their eyes never lost their spark of shared understanding. From his humble beginnings as a terrified slave on a dusty market block, Finn had not just survived. He had thrived. He had found a family, a purpose, and a love that had rewritten the destiny of a world. And as he stood on the balcony in his twilight years, his arm around his queen, watching their children play in the gardens below, he knew with a profound and peaceful certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. His story, once a tale of loss and captivity, had become a legend of hope, a testament to the power of a simple human heart to heal an alien world and find its own happy ending in the most unexpected of places. Years later, under the twin suns he'd once feared, Finn stood hand in hand with Queen Lyra on their palace balcony, their silver and white hair mingling in the desert breeze. Their adopted children, 2 virile girls and a nomad boy, laughed below in gardens Finn himself had coaxed from the sand. The slave market of Karjan was a distant memory, its chains replaced by the quiet strength of a family built on trust and love. No edicts from the High Council, no warlords, no betrayals could touch the peace they'd forged together. He was no longer a farmer from Earth nor merely a consort. He was king in all but name, her equal in every way that mattered. Their love, born in desperation, had blossomed into a legacy that healed a fractured kingdom. The desert, once a place of death, now bloomed with life because of them. And as the evening stars began to pierce the violet sky, Lyra leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, "You were never my slave, Finn. You were my salvation." He kissed her temple, his heart full, knowing home wasn't a planet. It was her. Together, they watched their future unfold, peaceful, whole, and finally free.